Hey Faith Family, welcome to the Beyond Sunday podcast at Calvary Bible, where we go beyond the Sunday sermon to explore some rabbit holes and to bring some biblical truths to the surface. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Calvary Bible Church, welcome back to another episode of Beyond Sunday. We had off for the Christmas break.
Welcome back to you.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm glad you got away. We missed you.
Yeah, it's good to be back. And the sun's shining today.
Yeah.
It's nice. It's been dreary and cloudy and rainy.
Yeah.
Drizzly.
Plus, I've been working with Austin most of the time. It's like, man.
Yeah, that's hard.
Dreary,
Cloudy.
rainy, cloudy.
Yeah. We all have trials and
We do.
tribulations
Yes,
in
we
life.
do. It's my cross to bear when you're away.
Yeah, it is. And when I'm here, you have jokes to bear.
I know.
So I had someone send me a joke to tell you.
They're catching on.
Yep. This one goes, what happened to the plant in math class? What happened to the plant in math class? Just to put a little pressure on you, Chase got it. I'm not good at jokes anymore. I've lost my touch. So
Plant in math class.
Yep.
I mean, it either got subtracted, divided. I don't know.
It grew square roots.
Oh, way to go, Chase.
Yeah, I was impressed.
That's
I didn't
good.
get it. That is good. Won't tell you where it came from.
Thank you.
To spare them from the harassment.
from my barrage of emails.
Yeah, so we're going to go back in today's episode. We're going to hit 2 sermons. I know.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. So December 24th in the morning would have been the 4th Sunday of Advent. Confession, I did not listen to the sermon.
Oh,
I did read the passage,
Happy
though.
New Year.
Yeah. But I have a question. So that would have been the 4th Sunday of Advent. Was the word love that morning?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that'll be out of Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 6 through 13 was the passage for that morning. So it's more of a hermeneutical question, I think, than anything. But we'll start there, and then we'll get into this past Sunday's Proverbs 3 sermon and revisit that for a few minutes. You good with that?
I have no choice.
I was going to say it doesn't matter.
No.
Okay, so
I'm at your mercy.
Deuteronomy chapter 7. Let me read.
Yeah, I'll stay in Proverbs, but you go ahead.
Okay, let me read just the first verse.
It was like 6
Verse
through 13,
6.
I think, right?
Yeah. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. Okay, so that's verse 6, just to give a little context here. So the first bullet point that morning, this is the question, was something like the special place we have with our God. Sound familiar? So is verse 6, for example, to be applied to Israel or to us? Because so your title there is the special place we have with our God.
Always, yeah.
And that seems to be, and if you're reading the context before that, it's kind of Israel displacing the nations that were in the promised land. So again, kind of just if you're reading it at face value, you're going to say this is written to Israel, not to us.
Right.
But you made a shift to us. Why? And then I think my follow-up question is going to be, help us know, when do we do that?
Sure. So the first thing is, I did mention on that Sunday, but it was very, very quickly, that if you go to the New Testament letters, you'll find the same wording used for the church. So we're a chosen people, for instance, in Peter's epistle.
Yep.
So I did that so that folks might, like whoever this person is, I did want that to come out on Sunday just because of people could be saying, well, that's being spoken only to Israel, not to us. So it actually, that same special position is ours, according to New Testament writers. So in that sense, we don't have to worry about, did we read that wrongly? We read it correctly. As far as though just an overall reading strategy, the best thing to do is to remember that the Old Testament is also being interpreted for us now because of Jesus teaching in the Gospels, and then because of his apostles teaching what he taught them in their epistles. So remember all of the reinterpretation that we get in the early Gospels, Jesus, when he said, "You've heard it said, but I say unto you," that type of language.
Mm-hmm.
So Jesus comes along and he starts to interpret the Old Testament with reference to himself and shows how followers of him will now gain a righteousness that exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees. And there I'm quoting from Matthew's gospel, let's say. So as an overall reading strategy, we're always reading the Old Testament knowing that it is God's instruction for us. You could think about Paul saying, these things were written as an example so that we might or might not.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty safe to start there. That doesn't mean that every single text is something that we can transfer immediately over, but by and large, that Old Testament story is our story. In this case, in the Deuteronomy text, where it's this is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So this is the last of the Pentateuch,
Torah.
or the Torah. So what we have now is we have instruction in our text, which is based upon God saying, look, I've redeemed you. Look at the parallels with us, by the way, in this case. I've redeemed you from slavery, in this case, not from Egypt only, but to sin. I'm your redeemer. So here's how redeemed people are supposed to live when I set them free and send them into the world. So there's a lot of similarities in this text.
So I really like this question because it doesn't just apply to this passage.
Right.
It's a great hermeneutical question, our Bible reading question, because we see it all the time.
Yeah.
So just to get back here, Deuteronomy 7, starting at verse 1 to 13, let's say, verses 1 through 5 are, here's what you've got to do. You got to displace the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, etc.
Interesting, right? We wouldn't say that instruction is ours.
Exactly.
Yep.
And so that's what I'm trying to get at here. When do we know, well, this applies to us, this doesn't apply to us?
Right.
Verses 1 through 5, we're going to say that doesn't apply to us directly.
Except for a couple of things. So number one, we would say it doesn't apply to us with respect to displace the people. So in other words, God has never taught us, the church, in any way, shape, or form that when you're born into the world and when you're born again, now you chase out all the non-Christians.
Right.
We're actually supposed to be making disciples.
Mm-hmm.
So our mission now is different from what their mission was. They were supposed to be light bearers in a different way than we were.
Mm-hmm.
In their day, God gave them the specific instructions. Look, you can't mingle with these people because of the danger they pose to you.
Mm-hmm.
In our day, we'll learn this on Sunday too, that God is able to use us in a different way in the world rather than to chase people out of our territories, so to speak. But let me just say, the one thing that you didn't read, though, I think was maybe in verse 2. Can you read verse 2?
Yep. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you and you defeat them, then you must devote them to complete destruction. You shall make no covenant.
That part.
You shall make no covenant with them and show no mercy to them.
Yeah. So one of the things that, God said is you can't go into an agreement with these people, because if you go into an agreement to live among them, they will cause you to be idolaters. Mm-hmm. Now that instruction now is not the instruction that we're given in our world because of what Jesus teaches his own disciples.
Yeah, but would you say maybe the principle of the tie that we make, the relationships we have with non-believers, there needs to be some wisdom in place there?
What I would do is I'd follow from make no covenant, and then I would go up into the New Testament in this case and show the places in Paul's letters where Paul says this is the way you're supposed to, act amongst non-Christians. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think of what's the one where he says, "Be not unequally yoked to."
Yeah,
something like that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
The language is kind of awkward, but most of us are familiar with it if we've been in church for a while. So there are places in the New Testament where there are specific instructions where God says, here's how we're supposed to act amongst the non-Christians that are all around us. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is similar to making no covenant with them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But so that becomes very difficult. I mean, already in just the opening verses of Deuteronomy, some of it applies directly, to use your words, and then some of it doesn't.
Yeah. Maybe one way I'm thinking about it a little bit is what we're reading here is God's account of his people and his leading them, his instruction for them, kind of the storyline of God's people. And there's some things that pretty clearly you can make a connection to the New Testament on. Chosen people is a great example of that. But then there's other things. Let's just go back to, the Exodus or the slavery in Egypt. And what did Egypt and Pharaoh represent in the story? And how does that parallel to our lives in 2024?
Yep.
And so there's going to be some things that we do just like they did, but there's other things that there's either a principle behind it or there's biblical wisdom behind it that can be applied to our lives.
Yeah, and to use some of the terminology, going back to some of the ancients like Augustine, when they start to figure out how God's revelation functions for the church, because remember, he's a bishop, he's a pastor, he uses the word signs, that the words are signs that point you to a reality beyond themselves. And so in this case, the redemption from Egypt is pointing to another redemption that we enjoy, something like that. So I like some of what Augustine did there early on with that. Yeah. It's helpful because the signs do point to something.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Okay. So yeah, I think that answers the question. The second part of the question, I'll just throw it out there, but I think it's pretty well answered though. Verse 13 is another example of it where you ended. He will love you, bless you, and multiply you. Keep reading that verse.
I know.
He will also bless.
I stopped on purpose. I did actually.
Yeah, no, I understand why.
Yeah.
He will also bless the fruit of your womb, the fruit of the ground, your grain, your wine, and your oil, and increase of your herd, etc. So some of those carry over.
Yeah,
specifically, not all of them.
Yes, because in the Old Testament sense, much of the blessing of God was connected to the agricultural time and prosperity, which is why I either said it Sunday or the Sunday before about, if you're a health and wealth person, you'd want to latch onto some of these texts. But those are all the blessings of being with God. And God says, I will bless you in all these ways. And they experienced that when they obeyed. And then, of course, the opposite is true. The curses fell on them when they disobeyed. But that's all typical Old Testament blessing language, the benefits of being with God in the Old Testament. Now, some of that changes, too, when you come into our world. Again, let me just say to all of us, but the person asked it, too. One of the things that we're always doing when reading the Bible is reading it as a whole. So from Genesis to Revelation, that's our book. So we're never reading Deuteronomy trying to figure out what does Deuteronomy mean. I'm really not concerned about that. What I'm concerned about is what does Deuteronomy mean theologically for the church? And that's only when we take the entire context of the scriptures. Now we interpret it all, which gets us away from, for instance, a health and wealth reading. Because we know that there's more in the Bible than just the promise that you'll be wealthy and healthy and have no miscarriages, for instance. Yeah. That's just not the promises of God anymore for his people.
So if I were going to ask you to sum up, and maybe you just did, but you can add to it, help us as a church, someone reading their Bible, working their way through the scriptures this next year, how do I know what to take from the Old Testament and what to leave, or how to kind of slice and dice it?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I'll say is, again, to go back to the ancients who would say the best readers of the Bible are those who read the Bible from cover to cover. So read it all.
The whole thing.
And read it all, putting the pieces together, rather than reading it, in little bits and pieces where you never put the pieces together. Read Deuteronomy with respect to the rest of the Bible. So the better off you are, the more you're familiar with all the Bible, the better you are a reader of the Bible in any place. So I would start with something like that. Second, then I would just go to, if you know your Bible well, now what you're doing is you're saying, okay, what part of our mission is different from Deuteronomy 7? And where would you find that? Where would you go to know that? And again, you have to know your way around the Bible to get there. So third thing I guess I would say is assume that it's written for you. Do that first. rather than what's the tendency of everyone is to assume that that's an ancient part of the Bible. Get used to the Bible, get used to God speaking to you. Put yourself into the storyline is what I tell my students all the time. Put yourself into the storyline, and then you'll discover what God intends for that Old Testament scripture to do for you as a part of the church. So assume that it's ours.
Yeah.
It's a word from God to us.
And that's good because a lot of people are starting a Bible reading program for the new year, and a lot of that's the Old Testament, depending on your plan.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of sectors in Christianity that disregard the whole Old Testament.
Sure.
Say it's not for us.
Right.
Don't
You don't
even
need it.
Yeah, just take it out of your Bible.
Yeah.
But that's a helpful reminder to start with. Let's assume this is for me. This is God's word, his revelation to me for life and godliness. Yeah. And I'm going to listen.
And as my friend and professor would say, remember, that's Jesus' Bible. That's pretty good. You know, he's always saying that. Yeah. And that's Jesus. That's the Bible Jesus used. So I'm good with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I got a little paperback on my shelf that's, do we need the New Testament? It's a little paperback.
What's the gist of that one?
The Old Testament is so, so important for us that do we even need, I'm sure it's an overstatement, but it's kind of a little.
But to make a point.
Yeah.
Good. All right. So into December 31st.
No way.
Yep. Okay. Proverbs chapter 3.
All right.
Open your phone again.
I got it.
Finding and holding on to wisdom.
Finding it, verse 13, holding on to it, verse 18. Yep.
Yeah. So blessed are the wise, wisdom for the new year. Why wisdom is so important. It pales, or gold and silver pale in comparison to it. You talked for a minute about, how money does make things easier sometimes and can make things happier.
Yeah.
I got a stat for you. You ready?
Yeah.
You're going to guess. Guess what percentage of Americans buy Christmas gifts for themselves?
It's the square root of something.
No. You want to take a stab?
I have no idea.
51%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 51% of Americans buy. So chances are one of us buys a Christmas gift for themselves and the other one doesn't.
Yeah.
Maybe we both do.
I didn't this year buy myself a gift, I don't think. I don't think I did this year.
I do buy things for myself around Christmas, but I don't wrap them.
Oh, yeah. Well, then you're off the hook.
So,
if you don't wrap it, it's not a gift.
Oh, goodness.
Right.
But wisdom is infinitely more valuable than gold and silver and rubies or whatever other red stones you may find.
Yeah.
But question here, you took us, or verse 18. Oh man, can you read it? I'm not open to it yet.
She is a tree of life to those who lay hold of her. Those who hold her fast are called blessed.
Okay. So tree of life. You took us back there. Clarify for me. I got a little bit lost. We were talking about we were talking about Adam and Eve in the garden. They weren't to touch it, but that was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The tree of life is wisdom. So help me out with that a little bit, because before you got there, I thought, tree of life. I like going back there.
So let me start with the tree of life. She's a tree of life to those who lay hold of her, means that wisdom functions as a giver of life beyond physical life. Let's start there. So I had a list of, I bet I had like four levels of definitions of this tree of life thing.
Okay.
All of them basically were saying it's more than the physical life they had. It's another level of life, and where it's renewal. What was the other word? Maybe healing came into play. There were 3 or 4 of those definitions that were trying to get to the level of, okay, what do you get? All of them agreed that she's a tree of life, meaning what she'll end up giving is something more than just physical life, which will end because of the curse.
Right.
So in some ways, they're all saying wisdom is, one of her benefits is she defeats the curse in human life, so that it allows a human being to exist beyond this cursed existence, which happened obviously quickly.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry about the confusion between the two trees. You're right. So she's a tree of life, but wisdom herself was lost when in the Genesis narrative, the only prohibition has to do with the other tree.
Yeah.
And that was the tree where, of course, they take part of that fruit and then they lose the very thing that she did offer. And I don't have the quote. You could find it in Genesis 3, but it's where able to make one wise, I think is the phrase.
Yes.
So obviously they see that, they hear that, and they go, oh, we want that.
Yeah.
And what I was trying to say is that's where they went ahead and took of that tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they lost the very wisdom that they were supposedly supposed to get.
Isn't it Eve who sees it and it's able to make her wise, and she wants that, but it's not good for her.
Yeah.
But she takes it anyway.
Yeah. So yes, the confusion was that tree of life is in this garden. They didn't get to that one yet, thankfully. But when they took of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that's when they lose the wisdom which is being offered here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So I don't know if that even clears it up for you, but if it doesn't, jump back in.
Yeah, no, it does. But that's a helpful way to flesh out the term too. It how did you say it? The tree of life. It takes away all of the effects of the curse. It's able to give you. How did you say?
Yeah, she's a tree. I mean, to use the language here, she's a tree that provides what I would consider to be life plus.
Yeah.
She's a tree that offers life beyond the curse, life with God, which is, of course, it's eternal as far as not dying,
right?
But it's eternal in quality. So it's a level above. I forget which scholar guy mentioned that level, but it's a level above the physical existence because of this is the life of God himself that we're getting.
Yeah. And so you ended the service then talking about ways that we know we're wise. And so the question came in just to kind of flesh out one of them in particular. Some of the ones I jotted down were, how do we know? The question is, how do we know if we're wise or gaining in wisdom? And you kind of phrased it, are we more humble? Are we more joyful? Are we more godly? And then you, this one caught the ear of someone. Are you more quick-sighted to his will?
And this is that part of that quote is coming from Packer, I believe.
Okay.
I think it's J.I. Packer. Quick-sighted to his will.
Yeah. How would you define that? Quick-sighted to God's will.
So what was fun, at least for me, about studying this particular term was God gives us a part of his own character. So if he is wise, what is he? And so let me start there. The wisdom of God was defined as he's able to devise the perfect end or goal and use perfect means to get there. So here's God who knows exactly what's best for his creatures, and he's able to providentially move in that direction, and nothing stops him from doing that. So he has perfect wisdom. Now he confers some of that to us. It's imperfect now. So when we got to the point where we said, okay, well, how do you know if you're wise or not? Being quick-sighted to his will is, do I have this sense of, I see the will of God always before me. My day is shaped by the will of God. I'm trying to think of language that I would use, for myself. Am I eager to do his will today? Quick-sighted, I think, was Packer's, and I could go back and check the source. I'm pretty sure it's Packer, because I was only really reading him a little bit because of the knowledge. What's his book? Knowing God by J.I. Packer. Knowing God, but then also Tozer, The Knowledge of the Holy. I read them both with respect to what was God's wisdom. What is the wisdom of God and then from there, what does he confer? So I think it was Packer who used that term, quick-sighted to his will, which is a person who is very, very eager to do the will of God. And then, of course, wisdom means that I do have the ability to see what it is and do it.
Mm-hmm.
So remember, wisdom overall is a skill.
Yeah.
It's skillful living. It's a person who succeeds according to the standards that God sets for life. And so this is the person who is quick-sighted to his will is the one who sees very quickly, I know this is the will of God for me. I know this is the will of God for me. I know this is the will of God for me. And my purpose in life is to accomplish his will in those areas, something
Mm-hmm.
along those lines.
And then the opposite of that would be, I'm just trying to think of how
Mm.
what that would look like for someone who's slow-sighted.
So, yeah, I mean, a couple of times during that message, I really wanted to slow down, but you know how it goes with
That's what
time.
this is for.
And so I thought about, it's pretty easy for me. Is my life focused on me or God? It was really kind of a
Okay.
simple. The more I thought about this last week, the more I thought, no, actually, it's pretty easy. I mean, the language that we've all grown up with is kind of like, do I live for God's glory or not? And that's still vague to me. But if I look at my day, am I living for myself or am I living for God? That's
Mhm.
an easy ask, I
Mhm.
think. That's not hard to figure out.
So someone who's slow-sighted to pick up God's will,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
is probably more focused on themselves. They're
Yeah.
thinking about,
They're not even looking. Yeah, go ahead.
how can how can I get ahead?
Yeah.
How can I accomplish my will for today?
Yeah.
Get my agenda
Yeah.
done, right? Their
Mhm.
personal
Yeah.
goals and desires
Yeah.
are really what's on their mind,
Yeah.
and not God's will or desire. And sometimes they coincide,
They could.
but
Yep.
right,
Yep.
what's driving that then
Yep.
too?
I think that's exactly right. I think it's so easy to see, a wise person is a person who is they're walking with God. And that was my first, I think the first in a list of things was, wisdom is walking with God. The ability to love your neighbor or the significant people in your life, to love and serve them. So walk with God, love and serve others. The ability to make good decisions that make you successful in the eyes of God. And then the ability to be faithful in these responsibilities that you've been given. There was a list of 3 or 4 things that I went through on Sunday. And so I do think it boils down to that. I mean, people get up, people are, start their day today, and are they thinking about the will of God or not?
Yeah.
At all.
And even just thinking about simply and practically, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? Is it what's on the Instagram feed or whatever social media?
Yeah.
Like what happened in the sports last night? Is that where you turn your attention first?
Well, that would be okay, that part.
Or are we starting our day not necessarily with 2 hours of prayer, but can I start my day with a God-focused, prayer?
Yeah. Lord, how to go about this day. And like I said,
those things help us orient our focus in a Christ-centered way.
Yeah.
As opposed to a self-centered way.
And I urged us all, God, would you please give us wisdom for today?
Mm-hmm.
If I say that, it's because I want to succeed for Him, for His glory. I know it's going to be for my good.
Yeah.
But I want it for His glory. Wherever my tasks are today. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. I think that helps.
Quick-sighted to His will. I'm quick. I'm quick to think about what does He want me to do. I'm quick to see those things. I'm quick to do those things. Resolute is a nice word. We don't use that much, but that's a nice word. I'm resolute to do those things. So all of that, seeing, I want His will. I see what His will is. I want to see it through. All of that, I think, is that wise person.
Yeah, good.
The fear of the Lord starts it all. Remember.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So there's my, glad submission to God.
Who's not safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. That's good. Anything else you want to add now that you got this is your bonus time?
Well, we probably should go back 3 or 4 other sermons, and hey, we're starting the core values this weekend.
Okay.
So we'll work them in order for the next 4 weeks.
Okay.
Lord willing.
Look forward to that. I'm not going to be here. Young adult retreat.
Is it this coming weekend?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So unfortunately,
where are you going?
We're going to a cabin up on Turkey Hollow Road.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know that cabin then.
Hey, great. Come join us. I don't know.
No, or it's not Judd's.
No.
Okay.
Mm-mm. No, not Judd's cabin.
Well, that's the Laurel one. Duh.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that.
Yeah. You'd think so. All right, great. Thanks for joining us on the podcast. Again, I'll remind you, if you have questions, email them into podcast@cbcmj.com.
Oh, okay. That's where they go.
That's where you can send them. Randy gets them. I get them. I read them.
Wow.
Randy doesn't. No, you do.
Sometimes I don't.
I bring them to the table, though. And that's what it's all about. Good. You happy? I'm happy. Have a great week.
Happy New Year.
Won't see you on Sunday.
I will, Lord willing.
See you around. Love you guys. Thanks again for joining us on today's episode. And remember, our Sunday sermons are meant to lead us to a life of worship beyond Sunday.